Hello, and welcome to the webinar Recruit and Retain Your Cleared Talent Strategies for Security Sensitive Industries. My name is Megan Billingsley, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. To start us off, here's some context on the HR landscape and security sensitive industries today. The pendulum continues to swing in the labor market. We've gone from the great resignation to the point now where hiring managers aren't receiving too few applications, they're receiving too many. But there remain important exceptions to the situations, including employees with security clearances and those working in security sensitive roles. From Department of Defense personnel to air traffic controllers to corrections officers, specialized labor pools are constrained, and it's more challenging than ever to not only find the right candidates, but also to retain these employees. There are many reasons for this, as our experts will discuss shortly, but the important thing to note is that forward thinking organizations can successfully recruit and retain cleared talent across industries. By adjusting certain hiring strategies and workplace policies, recruiters, staffing firms, and HR departments can attract and keep quality employees, whether they have security clearances already or in security sensitive roles that may not require a certain level of clearance. Our experts will discuss the strategies that make a difference with these specialized employee populations so that organizations can keep vital roles filled not just today, but into tomorrow. Before we jump into our panel discussion, here's a look at what we'll be covering today so you know what to expect. First, some simple housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you'll find some application widgets for your use. These widgets are all resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to optimize your desktop space. The slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button in the top right-hand corner of your presentation window. We encourage you to submit questions using the Q&A widget throughout the presentation. We will try to answer your questions during the webcast, but if we run out of time, just know that we're capturing all of your questions and we'll refer them to one of our experts to follow up with you. All right, now let's introduce our speakers. I'm joined today by Patrick Moran, who is Director of Sales in Government and Public Safety with Pearson Clinical Assessment. Patrick is a clinical psychologist who has over 38 years of experience working with assessments and mental health tools for federal, state, and local government agencies, as well as nonprofit social services organizations. Patrick, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Andy Gill, Strategic Talent Acquisitions Lead with MetroStar, a Northern Virginia-based digital services and IT modernization company focused on federal, DoD, and national security customers at the highest security levels. Andy is also a retired Air Force veteran and former Amazon Web Services technical recruiter supporting intelligence customers. Andy, we're so glad you could join us today.
Thank you, Megan.
So let's start by level setting what types of employees we're talking about, because there is a range of security clearances and many differences between industries. So Andy, I'll start with you. What do we mean by cleared talent?
Yeah, so in my world, cleared talent is anyone that holds a U.S. government security clearance at any level that would grant them access to sensitive information. So this can be anything as little as a public trust clearance, all the way up to a full life cycle polygraph. There's many different clearance levels, but all of them grant access to sensitive information and would qualify as cleared individuals.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation, Andy. So Patrick, I'll turn to you next. When we say security sensitive employees, are we talking about more than just the cleared population?
Yes, and similar to what Andy was referencing, the federal government entities or agencies, of which there are many, have different levels of security requirements. Because obviously there is sensitive information that needs to be protected and managed and maintained. And you want to make sure that you are able to identify the appropriate personnel who are, first of all, capable of doing that, but are also at low risk of being compromised. So this would include the Department of Defense, for example, Department of Energy, people who are interfacing with the nuclear power industry or the nuclear weapons industry. It could also include, much farther down the chain, public safety. So it can include people who have the license to carry active firearms in the service of protecting the communities, and even private security. So although the security sensitive role on those lower level types of jobs do not require the same hoops and authorizations as you might obviously expect with the FBI or something like that. But that pretty much captures the kind of the intention of security sensitive roles, is that you're looking for people who have the capacity to protect the types of information and data and people that they're working with.
Excellent. Thank you both for clarifying those terms. So now that we're level set who we're talking about, let's explore some challenges that recruiters and HR professionals are facing with these employees. Patrick, I'll stay with you on this one. What are the big challenges here?
Well, as you noted in your slide, I think the biggest challenge is that you have an increasingly shrinking pool of qualified candidates. The higher up the chain you go in the security clearance requirements. So you take that and you couple it with often the professional development requirements to get to where they are. Is that you get a really tiny pool, and so the bar just goes up higher and higher depending on kind of the level of specificity of security requirements that you expect from them, or job sensitivity. And so that's probably the number one thing. And then the other, I think, this is probably for the second most challenging thing as far as we see is, having the education is obviously a good start point, but then you really need to have some, maybe what we might describe some of the soft skills of interpersonal or personality styles, interpersonal development, interpersonal styles, internal ways of how you process information and how handle challenges and stresses that you don't always see just through the course of someone's development or training. And so I think that being able to accurately identify those other aspects that are going to become job hazards in their success or in their level of maintaining the security requirements is important. And so being able to identify that accurately is probably the second biggest challenge for the increasingly intense security requirements as you go up the chain.
Those are really good points. Thank you so much, Patrick. Andy, as a recruiter in this space, what are some of the challenges you see?
Yeah, well, I'll second Patrick's notion that it is an extremely small population of people when you're talking at the highest levels of the cleared population. A lot of people don't realize this is public knowledge, like the number of clearances and the adjudication of clearances is public knowledge as far as numbers are concerned. It's tracked by Congress. And I think the last time I looked at numbers, it was like 0.4% of the US population has any clearance whatsoever. And then 7% of that 0.4% has a TSSCI or higher clearance. And so you're talking a fraction of a fraction at that point. And so, the challenge will be, do you want to put yourself in a recruiter seat that is going after that talent? I always like to liken it to, taking a professional fisherman saying you can only fish in this one little pond. Okay. It's a small pond. And we actually only are going to allow you to fish in this corner of this small pond. That's what it is to be a highly cleared, technical recruiter. And so you got to ask yourself if you really want to even start down that path in your professional career. But for those of us who are jazzed about that and the challenge that's there, I think that it really takes someone that is willing to be more than a recruiter. And what I mean by that is I always like to use the term talent advisor. I recruit people. My team recruits people. We get on the phone, we do the traditional recruiting thing. But there's another aspect of my job where I have to be an expert with what we're talking about today. Clearances, the cleared community, understanding the nuances of obtaining, maintaining, and even sometimes crossing clearances over from one organization to another. There's a lot of nuances when it comes to that. And as a recruiting professional, if you're an expert in those things, you can then advise, your hiring teams and your hiring partners that you're supporting. Take, for instance, a hiring manager that is fixated on a certain level of cleared person that has XYZ skill set. And as a professional in your space that it's going to take 9 months to find that person. because that's what the data has shown historically. But you also know that it only takes maybe 2 months to get somebody that clearance level. You can then go to your business that you're supporting and say, hey, we can look for this person with this clearance, but it's probably going to take about 8 or 9 months. Or we can look for somebody that doesn't have this clearance, but definitely has the skill set, and we can get them a brand new clearance and adjudicated way faster than it's going to take to find this person. So being an expert, being that professional fisherman, you're not going to take somebody, that is just a beginner fisherman and put them in that small pond, in that corner of that pond, and expect them to catch fish. But a professional is going to know the bait. He's going to know the time of day. He's going to know when the fish are biting, and he's going to know the information he or she needs to be an expert. And that's really the differentiator when it comes to the small population that we recruit from, is you have to be an expert in it.
Along the lines of what Andy is saying is that, as you get more specific in kind of the roles that these individuals have, is they're often recruiting from competitor, right? From competitor talent pools. And so there's a fair amount of is the grass greener on the other side? And so I think there's a real benefit in retaining employees by being able to attend to some of those other softer quality of life factors that you can build into their work. And it can be as simple as just having a good manager, quality life, but clearly salary is a piece of that, but it's not all of it. And so being attentive to that is, I think, really important. And so I think that also speaks to kind of some of the alignment. If you're only going, do you have the nuts and bolts of being able to do certain engineering tasks in a secure environment, then you might be missing the boat as far as the alignment of, because people have lives, they want to be able to have their whole life kind of respected, I guess, and attended to a degree that they enjoy their work, but they also enjoy their life outside of work. And so being able to support overall quality of life out as best you can is probably a good strategy to build in.
That's great advice, Andy. Thank you. And I think it's a perfect segue into our next topic, which is how to improve your recruiting tactics with cleared talent and security-sensitive roles. Andy, I'm going to stay with you this time. In addition to what you just mentioned about growing your expertise in this space as a recruiter, what other advice do you have to improve recruiting with cleared talent?
Yeah, I think that there's been a misconception in the community that cleared individuals kind of hide underneath rocks and don't come out in the light of day. And to some extent, they've got clearances to maintain, and so there's some truth to that. But I see that the successful recruiters in the highly cleared space today are very social media minded. Their social media presence and their online footprint is out there. It's very loud. It's engaging. And I think that that's been lost in the highly cleared space because we think that these individuals aren't on Reddit. They're not on Facebook. They're not on Instagram. You can't recruit off of those huge social media platforms. And really it's a myth. Like they are there. And, my advice would be, even if somebody's a seasoned, highly cleared recruiter, elevate your social media game and put yourself out there. They're not going to come in droves and raise their hand on social media and say, hey, I've got a, full scope poly and I support the Virginia customer on this contract. They're not going to come out and say that, but they will notice you. And if you're in the same circles as them, on the topic of, hacking the U.S. government and the history of that. If you're on a Reddit page that tracks that kind of topics, you're going to get cybersecurity engineers that are interested in that. And the more you're active on those platforms and engaged in the conversations, the more people are going to see you. They're going to come looking for you. They're going to knock on your door rather than you trying to, find them underneath a rock somewhere.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andy. I think that's really great guidance for our viewers. Patrick, I'll turn to you now. How can recruiters and HR professionals improve their tactics with this population?
So there's a couple ways. I think having a social media presence is important as well. The primary ones that are there, I think most of us know about, so just LinkedIn's and these types of things. But there's also industry-specific social media mechanisms or portals that the rest of the world just probably doesn't know about. So being familiar with those so that you can, I think see the people in the industry and follow the trends. But then also, I think that and this is kind of particularly where we focus a lot, is that I think that you want to be able to, when we talk about building a pipeline, we know that there are certain behavioral and personality types of styles or dynamics or preferences that fit well within an industry. And the recruiters really need to be involved in, we have here the kind of long-term pipeline. So for example, let's say we are looking at public safety, like police officers, for example, right? That the ability to predict who's going to be basically a high-performing public safety servant we have the capacity to do that, but the recruiters really need to have a relationship with the people in the industry, like the police officers, like the unions, and so that they can understand the ongoing hiring dynamics, the job delivery challenges that they have in the performance of their duties. And while I use police officers as an example, this really goes across the board. So whether it's the Department of Energy or if it's private security guards, for example. Texas, for example, has recently required that private security guards that are carrying firearms must go through a personality assessment at the beginning of their tenure, or if they're already hired, they're not grandfathered in. They have to go and get personality clearance. So being aware of these types of industry threads that have kind of a longitudinal timeline and being involved in that industry in that capacity as an HR professional is really, really important. And you build also industry credibility by having those relationships, and then you get better people.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Patrick. I think that there's so much on this topic. We could spend the entire webinar here, but we won't do that. Andy, I'll just return to you now. Are there any other strategies you can recommend to improve recruiting with these employees?
Yeah, there's a growing number of organizations that are identifying, or not identifying for the first time, but maybe admitting for the first time that, we're doing work for the government that requires a lot of people at these very, very specific clearance levels with very, very specific high-level technical talent. In the combination of getting that is very challenging. In some situations, it's actually impossible. There's not enough people in these very niche category of requirements to deliver on the missions that the government is saying they need industry partners to deliver on. And so that puts, a recruiter that is supposed to recruit that type of work in a very tough spot. And the way that companies and recruiting teams are elevating their delivery on this challenge is through feeder programs. And what I mean by feeder programs is, if you take the fact that we need to find that high level clearance and that high level of technical talent, and finding both of those at the same time is a huge challenge, then you can develop pipelines of people. And, this takes organizational buy-in, because there's a lot of uplift on the organization's part too, to maybe find the individuals that have the clearance, but maybe not the technical talent, and build a program within your organization that hires for the clearance level and then upskills the technical talent. Use your internal knowledge and internal experts to say, well, we've been recruiting for this program for 9 months and we can't find Kubernetes experienced people at this cleared level. So we bring on 7 people that have the clearance and say, we're going to put you through a 2-month, pipeline of upskilling in Kubernetes and containerization. And therefore you're building what you need rather than going out and trying to find what doesn't exist. I was a part of, when I used to recruit for AWS in their Intel sector, they recognized this early on in their contract with the Virginia customer, that there was not enough cloud engineers in the entire world at the full scope poly level to deliver on this contract. And so they built a 16-month pipeline program that upskilled even people with just help desk, service desk experience. Well, if you had a poly and you were a help desk technician and you wanted to be a cloud engineer, they're going to make you a cloud engineer in 16 months. So it really, it went to where the talent or where the people were. and provided an opportunity for up leveling. And that's really, you have to build that into your strategy.
These are all such great ideas. Thank you both for this. I would like to pivot a little to the other half of the equation, which is retention. Let's start with an issue that's been incredibly important for HR in recent years, and that is particularly impactful when working with security-sensitive roles and employees, and that's mental health. Patrick, I'll start with you. How can employers support their employees' mental health to improve retention rates?
Well, first of all, I think that recognizing that it's a real dynamic, it's a real factor, and I like to, even as within the industry, I like to even refer to it as kind of psychological health. Maybe you've kind of moving away from this idea of just mental health, partly because I think mental health tends to bring with it a bit of a medical orientation, and I think that HR professionals, speaking to the broader kind of psychological health of an individual, it really opens up the things that you can hone in on and focus in support of your personnel. So, for example, being able to assess quality of life with individuals can be a very critical aspect to their job retention, their job security, and the security clearances, for example, or security sensitive roles that they are supposed to basically maintain. And so being able to kind of tap into that in a way that is not medicalizing the issues, I think is a really important factor. Because I've heard from a number of HR folks that they really stay away from looking at mental health components if it suggests that there's any kind of a diagnostic consideration or lift or thing that would cross their desk. And so I think kind of reframing the language around kind of psychological health overall, which includes, like, as I mentioned, kind of the protective factors that come with having good, stable quality of life. So let me give an example. Quality of life challenges could be in the areas of financial distress. It could be marital distress. It could be medical concerns, family illnesses, and there's a number of these. But we do know, particularly in the the federal protective entities, that people who have compromised qualities of life are at risk of being exploited by nefarious forces. And so being able to then openly understand and accept that this is an important platform from which to provide support is really, I think, critical for HR people to be open to, and not kind of shy away from, mental health, that's not our thing, okay? But psychological health is more global, and it is, I think, your thing. So let me give you an example. I noticed we have here the Department of Defense H2F initiative. What the Department of Defense did is they without going into too many details, they examined the force readiness of their I think 18 to 24-year-old active duty, and what they determined was that we could better support them globally in being ready for deployment by covering a number of these kind of critical areas, of which seven critical areas, of which cognitive health and mental health was a piece of that, as well as nutrition and spiritual health and physical and these kinds of things. And so they recognized the value of making sure that the personnel have well-rounded support across multiple domains. And so they've been rolling this initiative out for a number of years now on many different basis. So just as an example.
Excellent. I think that's a really interesting point, Patrick. Andy, what can organizations like MetroStar do to support their cleared employees in terms of mental health and overall well-being?
Yeah. So, we at MetroStar focus on IT professionals. So it's a little bit more challenging from the outside perspective to understand, what stressors and what national security secrets or information are they holding that are so stressful? But it definitely is. When you're talking about the data ingestion of the information that they are charged with securing and working in, is very, very sensitive, and they know that. And to be able to take on a role that you are, say, in charge of building the cybersecurity infrastructure that protects a lot of national security secrets or missions that, you know, maybe the warfighter is ongoing in the moment, that can be super stressful. You know, if that breaks down, it goes to the IT professional. If a security breach happens, it goes to the cybersecurity engineering team that is charged with securing that. So it's incredibly important to make sure, like Patrick was saying, that you know, the mental stability and it's sound. And you know, we have we point out a lot of veterans, obviously for obvious reasons. A lot of veterans come out of the military and go into cybersecurity or cloud engineering and you know, in IT type roles. And being a veteran myself and a 24-year retired veteran, I know the before and the after. You know, what I mean by that is when we entered into, you know, 20 years of war, our resources that we provided for our warfighters were pretty non-existent compared to today. And over 20 years, it's gotten incredibly better. I've watched it happen. The resources that are you know, provided to today's warfighter that's wearing a uniform are incredible. But when you leave that comfort zone and you step into the industry side or the commercial side of non-military world, and all of a sudden you're still have the same stressors, you're still securing national security, and you still have that mission, but you don't also have the same resources for mental health, it can feel like you're, you know, kind of walking off a cliff. That safety and that, you know, that safety bubble that you had with the military, you know, can all of a sudden go away. And so in industry, you know, our organizations, we have to make sure that we are keeping the same standard that the military and Department of Defense have, I wouldn't say perfected, but they have improved to. And it will be an issue with retention and quality of delivery of operation if you don't have those same things. You know, their quality of work is going to go down if, like Patrick is saying, they're having financial issues and they don't have any resources to help them with their financial struggles, you know, as well as making them susceptible to compromise from bad actors. So I can't stress this enough that, like, if you're an organization in the government space, in the highly cleared space, your mental health program for your employees has to be rock solid, because a lot of the people we're hiring, their predecessors, if they came from the military or not, they have these resources. You need to make sure that you're also providing them.
It's really powerful advice, Andy. Thank you. So let's talk about some other retention-focused strategies, specifically learning and development, or L&D. L&D opportunities have risen to the top of employee surveys when asked what gets them to stay with an employer. So Andy, staying with you on this one, is L&D a way to keep security-sensitive employees with your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I directly answer that, like, you got to paint the picture that these individuals know that they're highly sought, right? When they get out of the skiff and they boot their phone up and maybe they open their email, I guarantee you every day they've got probably 10, 12 messages from recruiters. So they know that they are highly sought. They know their skill set is needed. And the reason I say that is these individuals want career growth. They're in this space not because it's easy. They want a challenge. They want to do something that pushes them, and they want to advance in their career. Usually when I was talking to you know, career-minded individuals, the candidates already know where they want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. They need to know that they're talking to an organization that is going to provide an avenue for them to get there, and not have like a dead-end path. And so being a recruiter that understands L&D and what your organization provides, hopefully it's a good product, and speaking to that in those initial conversations really will solidify somebody's interest that is interested in career growth. So obviously there's many different options of you know, learning and development, but you know, having something to say, hey, you know, we offer $2,500 in yearly funds to, further your knowledge in whatever you're interested in. And that's something that's a quantifiable benefit that they can say, okay, well, yeah, I wanted to get my CISSP certification this year. So if I come to MetroStar, I don't have to pay for it. They can pay for it and I can get that certification. So it's super important on the tip of the spear recruiting efforts to know what your organization provides, and hopefully your organization provides something that's solid.
Those are great points. Thank you so much, Andy. Patrick, I'll turn things back to you. Let's talk about recognition. Everyone likes to be recognized for great work, and I think we can all agree on that. How should employers think about recognition in this space?
Well, I think there's kind of two approaches to this. One is kind of the I think maybe a simpler approach, but it may not have kind of the same impact. And that is basically just recognizing people for their successes, certificates of appreciation, rewards, and these kinds of things. And sometimes those might be financial as well. But I think there's also, more importantly, there's the soft recognition, which is delivered through mentoring and coaching and building in teachable moments and teachable opportunities throughout the trajectory of these individuals' careers within an organization. Because they say people don't leave organizations because of bad companies; they usually leave because of bad managers, right? And so part of the HR commitment is to really help facilitate how the management or the leadership nurtures and mentors, I think, these personnel who are highly sought after. So, I call this kind of a soft skill focus area, because it really involves a commitment to do that, and recognition of the value of that, and it allows for some softness, as it were, in some of the criteria or thresholds we would expect someone to cross in order to I think advance themselves within the company and their career there. So to me, I think that's probably more important than just kind of the recognition of, you've done good and here's a certificate or here's public acknowledgement of that. I mean, some people do value that, but I think the softer focus on the mentoring and these kinds of things has probably more sticking power. So.
Excellent. And just to lean into your expertise here, you had mentioned before about personality assessments. Is this something that can help in this arena?
Well, I think there are. We have, for example, we have some tools like the Minnesota Personality Questionnaire, which looks at kind of traits and styles of how people interface with others in their environment, in their world. And these are like non-clinical types of tools, so they can be used in really identifying talent and talent pools. So, for example, when you're forming a team that is going to have some high level of stress or have high levels of expectation for security and appropriateness in how they interface and maintain information, is that you want to be able to identify folks who are kind of maybe less flappable by some of the challenges of the life that they're working. Or you don't want somebody who's real cynical, for example. You don't want somebody who has a little bit of paranoia, even though they may not be like psychiatric levels of paranoia. There are people who are cynical and who aren't necessarily trusting of people. Those are probably not the ones that you're going to want to have in some of these roles, because you need to be able to have folks who are openness to the experience that they're involved in, and also open to feedback, because they're really dialed in to some very specific, highly sensitive areas of either access to information or the technology that they're dealing with. And so, another one that we use that's used quite frequently in the public safety realm is this test called the Minnesota Personality Inventory, the multiphasic personality inventory, and we can detect with a high level of predictive validity who is going to be a good candidate to become police officers or corrections officers or dispatch or airline traffic controllers, who have very, very high stress jobs, as you can imagine, because so many lives depend on it. So being able to identify some of those core personality variables that we have, consistent data and years of research that are highly predictive of success in those roles, I think is really important. Just hiring from your gut isn't enough. So
excellent. Thank you so much. Andy, in terms of recognition from your perspective, what are your thoughts on how employers can reward great work? Is it harder because cleared employees' work is so often classified?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, for obvious reasons, a lot of the work that we do isn't, you're not going to, see it on your LinkedIn feed, that MetroStar delivered this XYZ program for, the CIA or whatever, you're not going to see that. And so seeing your work out in public and being able to attach yourself to that is nearly impossible. So I think, Patrick mentioned like the importance of the manager. I think that deserves a foot stomp, especially in the classified environment. Behind closed doors in a skiff, you can commend all you want, and it should be done. And it's gonna take a good manager to understand when his or her team, deserves or needs a little bit of recognition, behind locked closed doors, sometimes in a vault. But also there's other options that, within the confines of what, the customers that we support, allow. There's internal tools that you can build into your system that allow people to quietly and publicly, within reason, recognize coworkers. And I think that putting the power into everyone's hand to recognize people, and not just senior leadership and managers, it kind of does two things. It obviously recognizes and empowers people, but it gives, the individual contributor, maybe the lowest ranking person in the organization, the power to say, hey, I want to recognize this person for something that they did. MetroStar, we use this tool that actually gives each employee like a points balance every single month. And you can give those points out. You don't keep them. It's a use it or lose it every single month. But you can give like 20 of your 120 points to Patrick, because Patrick helped you, solve this problem with, that you were doing in your workspace. And it goes on a dashboard, and people see it and they're like, oh, cool, Patrick did this, and then Patrick earns those points over a year or so, and he can trade those in for like iPods and iPods. Well, I'm dating myself. iPads and earbuds, gift cards to restaurants. And so it kind of gamifies the need for recognizing people. But yeah, to get back to your original question, it is challenging in the classified space, but it's not impossible. And we can't use that excuse that, oh, we just can't recognize people because of what we do is so classified. And you got to think outside the box.
Yeah, and Andy said something really important. I think this idea of gamifying things is that when you have these high stress, high scrutiny and high intensity roles, is that being able to have those kind of outlets, those kind of exhaust valves, and gamification can really, I think, make that, and it can facilitate that. It can bring some fun, humor, camaraderie into an environment where you have a real intense focus. So I think that's really important. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, and I mean, even outside of recognition, right, Patrick, like the ability to get outside of your secure facility and do something with your team. I know this isn't kind of aligned with what we're talking about, Megan, but it's equally as important to provide like opportunities to de-stress with your team, and not just like clock in, clock out of your secure facility every single day. Like, does your organization, do you live around bike trails? Like, is there somebody that's a bike enthusiast? Like, give them the opportunity to start a bike club or whatever. I mean, this is not any groundbreaking ideas, but like we have to position our organizations and HR professionals, whether you're a recruiter or not, like you have a responsibility for retention. Like retention's a super important thing, because like, I don't want to be recruiting for the same position 7 times in 1 year. I want to retain the people that I hire. And so being a voice and an advocate for, things that allow people to stay or make them want to stay is also your responsibility. You're not just the front door. So,
yeah.
Excellent points all around. Thank you so much for these great insights. This has really been fascinating. And I do want to, in the time we have left, I do want to take some questions from our audience. So we do have one here. And also, just a note, if you have a question, feel free to submit that into the Q&A widget. First one here, how can a smaller staffing firm or company compete on salary demands with bigger players like AWS or Google? Andy, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I've worked for AWS in their cleared area, so I intimately know. For lack of a better way to describe it, the bigs of GovCon, they have the ability to give golden handcuffs that not every small or medium-sized company can give. And I think as a recruiter, if you're not, in supporting an organization that has, $60,000, annual mission bonuses just for holding a specific clearance, yes, that exists. You have to recognize that, okay, I'm not going to win on the topic of, restricted stock or, large sum bonuses. So, I think the first step is to understand what your competition is offering, right? Like you have to understand what other companies are doing, to retain people from a financial perspective. And then once you start with that knowledge, then you can sort of say, okay, well, I can't meet that, but what can we do, right? Like we can't just stay and say, this is the way we've always done it. As your organization grows, can you do something and influence your organization at a high level to say, hey, we've got to do something financially to retain these people, and start exploring that, put a tiger team together and, say, hey, we can't do what this company's doing over here, but we can do something, right? And so I think it starts with knowing what your competition is offering and then combat that with what you can, if anything.
Great points. Thank you. Our next question is also about financials. And Andy, I'll keep this one with you. You had mentioned investing in feeder programs. How can you get leadership buy-in to fund something like this?
Data. Start with data. Data doesn't lie. Numbers don't lie. As recruiters, we're constantly in conversations where we're complaining to, hiring manager Joe Schmo, hey, I can't recruit for this position because I've talked to literally 75 people and, 90% of them don't have XYZ, requirement that you're asking. And when you start to recognize the writing on the wall that it is one or two things that's preventing you from being successful, you have the information right there to go to senior leadership and say, hey, we can't solve this by just trying to find it because it doesn't exist. We have to make it. And if you know what those things are, and you work with your internal stakeholders to work towards a solution of how you solve that problem. Going back to the same well and finding the same people doesn't work all the time. So being a game changer in figuring out a way to close those gaps and come to your senior leaders with data, it's not only going to earn you, a lot of kudos from their perspective, but it gives you the tools to make a very compelling case that we have to do something. It's really, really simple when it comes down to just raw data. You know what you need. We got to figure out how to build that.
Yeah, can I add to this?
Mm-hmm.
I think some of this also goes to the earlier question around the pipeline, and I'm absolutely in agreement with Andy that you need to have the data, but you got also have to start somewhere. But the thing is you don't have to recreate the wheel. There are many large organizational entities that have created these pipelines, particularly in the tech industry. I mean, that's an easy example where where you don't necessarily need a master's or a PhD to do high-level technology, IT or hardware-based development. And so I know of companies that have identified how to work with local community colleges, for example, to get critical certifications for folks who, they don't necessarily know what they want to do, but they basically get scholarships, 2-year scholarships to go to this program, and upon completion of all the required certificate courses, they're guaranteed to have a job that starts at a certain salary range. So there's decades of this already being demonstrated. Another example I heard about a number of years ago was Microsoft, I believe, was beginning to look at how they could support neurodivergent young adults who are absolutely fantastic in the software world, but they don't do well in other arenas in their own personal development. And so they were creating specific high school transition training programs for them to become involved with Microsoft as programmers and these kinds of things. And so I think there are a lot of examples where you can go and look at the data that have already been collected by partner agencies or entities in the community and see what their success rate is. And then it takes a bit of a risk up front just to invest that resource initially, but the data will tell you the truth. I absolutely agree with Andy.
Excellent suggestions. Thank you so much. So our next question is, are personality assessments like clinical tools, and Patrick, I know you touched on this earlier, do you need training or certain medical qualifications to administer these? Patrick?
Yes, it depends on the tool. So for example, there are some that require PhD level training to be able to use them, interpret them appropriately, or to have somebody who's available to help facilitate that process and through their consultative relationship with you and whatnot. And then there are those that are less. They have less of a requirement for that. And so, within our company, for example, we have levels of certification. A being the lowest, almost anybody can use that. It's almost like screeners. And then you have B, which are folks who may be working in the industry, but they're not necessarily psychologists, but they have an interface with. There's a certain level of knowledge and expectation of expertise within the industry to use them. And these would be things that are not screeners, but they're more along the lines of like some of these the personality tests I was telling you about earlier, the Minnesota Personality Questionnaire. This would be someone who doesn't require a PhD in most circumstances, but would be able to use this as a part of their recruitment endeavor. Okay, as long as you have somebody who has enough qualifications and understanding of what a personality test basically is. It's not just something you do online and on Facebook link or whatever. Something that you really have to kind of prepare for, because there's a lot of data that goes into the development of these, and sometimes decades worth of data. So, and then there's the highest level, which are the ones that are typically going to be applied for these more high stakes, security sensitive, public safety sensitive roles. Where you really want to make sure that you're ruling out things that are going to be problematic for the person's success or the safety of the community or the protection of the information they're getting access to. And again, even on those higher level tests, there are we have collected what we call normative data, thousands and thousands of data points of who's successful and who's not, and then we continually modify and update these as appropriate based on what we're finding and seeing. So I hope that helps. So MMPI is a big one that's used a lot in public safety and a lot in the MMPI Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory is used quite a bit, and at all levels of the security apparatus, from security guards to CIA and FBI and NASA and all kinds of stuff. So
excellent.
Hope that helps.
Thank you so much. It does. And we've actually got another question on assessments, which is one I've had myself in the past. How can recruiters know if candidates are telling the truth on these assessments? Patrick?
Well, so that's a very good question. Some assessments are what we call very face valid, so you know exactly what they're asking for. And sometimes that's really appropriate. So for example, if you're working with somebody who is, saying that they want to kill themselves, they're suicidal, you want to get very specific as to what kind of thoughts and actions and things that they're having. But usually that's not the case, right? So when we're talking about recruitment, these kinds of things, is people do what we call impression management, right? So, and usually they're trying to do what we call fake good. They're not going to look good, right? And so that means they're going to minimize things that make them look a little bit questionable or at risk. And so the high quality personality measures have what we call validity indicators, which can look for either over-reporting of symptoms or kind of traits or behaviors, under-reporting of that, which is going to be fake and good, doing that positive impression management, and random responding, a whole bunch of different kinds of windows that we use to look at the validity of the profiles that they're giving us by completing these tests. And then even within specific groups. So for example, with airline pilots, we know that they're going to probably look good, right? So then we get data that demonstrates that. And then we are able to then use that data to predict who ends up being, a good stable airline pilot, even though those validity scales may be elevated, but as a group they're elevated. So then we know how to then compare new recruits against a data set that we've established. We know the bias in general based on our own research on this. So most tests that you get that aren't designed this way will not have these kinds of validity scales in them. And that's why they're used in those more security sensitive roles, clearly. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. I think we've got time for one more, and that is, do you have any advice about how to get a new candidate started with getting clearances, such as someone interested in cybersecurity or intelligence, but they don't yet have any clearances? Andy, you want to take this one?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. My advice would be get your foot in the door somewhere. I had a candidate a number of years ago that applied to a job, said he had a clearance that I was requiring on the requisition I was working. Got on the phone with him. I was super jazzed to talk to him. His quals looked good. But then he immediately stopped me. He said, "Hey, Andy, I got to be honest. I don't have this clearance." And, here we go, right? Another liar. But he continued to say, like, "Hey, the reason I did that is because I wanted to get you on the phone and I wanted to know, how do I tap into this cleared community? I've never had a clearance before. I know I can get one, but I don't know how to get one. You can't just go and apply like you're applying for a driver's license." And I respected that about him. And we had a great conversation. And basically what I told him, I said, you may have to take a lateral or even maybe a lower role, or maybe a role in an area that you're not really interested in, that doesn't require clearance, as long as you get into an organization that has work in the highly cleared space, and do that job for a little bit. And then organizations like mine and MetroStar, we value our internal employees a lot. And if we have the talent here, we're much more susceptible to saying, okay, well, Megan has, delivered on this other program for us. She doesn't have a clearance, but we can get her a clearance over the next few months and then move her over into this team, And so proving yourself, and maybe in an area that you don't necessarily want to do for the rest of your life, as long as you get your foot in the door with an organization that does highly cleared work, was my advice to him. And I was able to get him a job with the organization, and then he was able to get his clearance over time. But that was his path in. So that's one way to do it, and arguably maybe the only way, unless you happen to find another way.
Yeah, I had a conversation years ago, if I can interject, with the CEO of one of the HR company, and what they said to me is if you could standardize bio data, which is basically biographical experience and background and history, that it would be the golden ticket for every HR entity out there. The problem is that people are so varied and diverse in their experiences. How do you standardize any of that, right? So, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so right along the lines of what Andy is saying is that if you can get in, then what you're basically doing is you are giving those HR personnel bio data for you as an entity, as an employee. And then you go from there.
Excellent. All right, that is all the time that we have today. But I do want to thank Andy and Patrick, both of you, again, for speaking with us. Your insights have been very enlightening today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Delightful. Thanks for having us.
I'd also like to thank our listeners as well, and we hope you've gotten some great perspective on recruiting and retaining cleared talent and security-sensitive employees. If you're looking for additional resources, please visit our dedicated HR support page. You can find the direct link in your resources widget. Today's webinar will also be available on demand if you want to review anything that we've talked about today. Thanks again for watching.